The title to the message is a little different than is in the bulletin. It's entitled, "The People at the Trial of Jesus." You know, when you look at Jesus, we find that he made enemies and he also made friends. And as we look at his enemies, this group of young people came to the Garden of Gethsemane. They carried sticks and stones and a rope, and they tied his hands and his feet. They took him to Annas, who was the high priest's father-in-law, Caiaphas, and they tried to crucify him. They searched for false witnesses. And in their search, that they might accuse him, but you know, they spit in his face. They hit him with the palms of their hands. They pulled out his beard. They made a crown of thorns and beat it into his forehead until he bled. The enemies of Jesus was there. And they smote him with the palms of their hands. And they said, "Prophesy, who smote you?" They took him to Pilate. Pilate accused him and said, "I find no fault with him," and sent him back to Herod. And Herod accused him before Herod and set him at naught, mocked him, arrayed him in a garment robe, and sent him back to Pilate again. You know, the Bible says that this two meetings of Pilate and Herod made friends of people that had been enemies. Now, they set him at naught, they mocked him, they arrayed him in royal robes, and they sent him to Pilate. Now, when Pilate received him back the second time, he received a note from his wife saying, "Having nothing to do with that just man." And so Pilate tried to release Jesus because, so he said, you know, it's the custom during the Passover to set one prisoner free. And we have Barabbas and we have Jesus. Who do you want? And the multitude and the chief priests were told in Mark 15, moved the people until they cried, "Give us Barabbas." Now, Barabbas was the original person that the cross that Christ carried was to have. And they all cried, "Give us Barabbas, give us Barabbas." And Pilate looked at the mob and the multitude and he said, "Why? What shall I do with Jesus?" And the mob said, "Crucify him. Crucify him." So he had him beaten with a 9-pronged whip and released him to the people, and they crucified him. Pilate said, "I'll release him," but they said, "We don't want him. We want Barabbas." The second group of people that were there were his friends. But not one of his friends spoke up. When in his defense. In the garden, Gethsemane, they fell asleep. When he was captured, they fled. You know, the person wonders, they had been with Christ for 3.5 years. Surely there should have been a friend that would speak for him. But not one person. And they slept while he was praying, "Father, if it be possible, take the cup from me." And they fled when he was arrested and taken to Annas and back to Caiaphas. You know, I've wondered about this many times. I have a book at home that called "They Watched Him Die." And it deals with all the people that were there at the cross when Jesus died, where they watched him die. You know, what a story his friends could have told. Yet not one of them said one thing in his defense. There is no record anywhere where a friend spoke up and said, "Don't do it." There were only 2 people that spoke up. There was Judas, who betrayed him with a kiss and 30 pieces of silver. And there was Peter, who denied him when he was standing outside the fire warming his fingers before Peter's home. Then there were the neutrals. You know, the neutral people had come in to Jerusalem because it was the Passover. They came in as a curiosity seeker. Many of them had heard about Jesus. They had heard about his miracles. They heard about his teaching, and they hoped to see a miracle. His fame had reached them, even in far countries, and they came to see a miracle. They wanted to hear him, to see him. They were waiting to be convinced. All they heard were the enemies of Jesus Christ. They were waiting to be convinced. They made decisions based on what they heard. They hoped for answers, and they got them. And the multitude of neutrals turned into a mob and joined those who were crying, "Away with him, crucify him," because there was no one that spoke up and said, "Don't do it." They joined their voices with the enemies when they might have been turned into friends if just one person would have spoke up. You know, the tragedy is not that Christ was crucified. The tragedy was he had no choice. He was born to die. And when he prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane, "Father, if it be possible, let this cup take from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but your will be done." He had to die. There was no way out. He had no choice. The verdict, whether who spoke or didn't speak, wouldn't have made any difference. He had no choice. He had to die. There was no way out. No matter what the witnesses had said, the verdict had to be the same. You know, the tragedy was many a neutral was lost. I'm going to bring you a statement a little later on that it'll shake us. The tragedy was that many a neutral will be lost. Many a neutral could have been saved. Many a neutral could have been turned into disciples if there was only a witness that would have spoken. Only a witness if they could have spoken up. You know, the years, 2,000 years ago, separates us from this event. But the picture has not changed. The enemies of Christ are still speaking. There are evolutionists who say that we evolved from a monkey. There are atheists who say there is no God. There are modern Christians, and I remember that modern Christian crusade that happened about 30 years ago, when the motto was, God is dead. And I can remember a car having the whole back bumper with a bulletin board on it saying, my God is not dead, sorry about yours. In this God is dead movement of the modern Christians. There are Jehovah's Witnesses who believe that Jesus was not divine, he was just a man. And he set us a sample in how to live. There are false preachers who in the name of Christ are preaching false doctrines. Yes, today their followers are still speechless. They are afraid to speak up. Multitudes are still making decisions based on what they hear. Joel chapter 3 verse 14 says that there are multitudes in the valley of decision, for the day of the Lord is near. God's problem is getting these handful of neutral people to make a decision to come over on the right side. Why do we mingle so freely with the crowd when a word from us might turn neutrals into positive people who might cause them to be saved? If you would have been there 2,000 years ago, what would you have done? Psychiatrists say that if you would have denied him then, you would have denied him now. If today you are speechless, you would have been speechless then. You know, today there are 2,000 years ago, God is looking for instruments of grace to help the neutrals. There are those waiting to be convinced, those hoping for answers upon which evidence would make a decision. You know, I can remember, as you know, I'm the oldest member of the church, I guess. I can remember, I've been in the Lord's work for over 60 years, about 62 years. And I pastored for 30 years. Then I worked in the conference office for 15 years. Then in the conference office as a real estate agent for them, buying churches and selling churches. In fact, the first Korean church in town that was bought, my name is on the patches of it. You had a doctor and a lady that were both dentists, and they worked with me on buying it. I'd like to talk to you about two of the best storytellers that ever came along in the Adventist church. The first one was Eric B. Hare. He was a storyteller, and most of his stories and so forth evolved around the Burmese people. The second greatest storyteller that I believe that our church has was Josephine Cunnington Edwards. I don't know whether you've ever heard her preach or not, but she preached for me when I was down by the Cincinnati area in Ohio. And I want to bring to you something from her. You know, Josephine Cunnington Edwards, her son was Bob Edwards. And some of you know Bob. He was the tenor of the quartet for the Voice of Prophecy. Bob C. Mount was the second tenor. Wayne Hooper was the baritone. And, of course, Jerry Dill was the last one. When Josephine Cunnington Edwards joined the Adventist Church, her whole family all came in. Every one of them. But one of them, her brother, 2 years later departed and left the church. Josephine Edwards took that very seriously. And she started to pray for her lost brother. And they prayed and they prayed and they prayed. 1 year went by and 2 years went by, 3 years went by, and she was still praying for her brother. 5 years went by. By that time, some of us probably would have quit praying. 10 years went by. 20 years went by. 30 years went by. And that was about the time I came into the picture of knowing her. 40 years went by. And her brother was still on their prayer list. They were praying for him day and night. For 45 years they prayed. Friend, I think that if it was up to us, we would have quit praying long before that. By this time, her brother was basically crippled. He was in a wheelchair, and he was in his house when he heard a knock on the door. It was not easy for him to get out of the wheelchair and to move, so he just simply yelled out, "Come in!" And a stranger opened the door. And he walked over to where Josephine Cunnington Edwards' brother was. And he put his hand on his shoulder. And he said, one short sentence. You have 7 days to get your house in order. 7 days. He was so shook up because all of a sudden the person disappeared. He was so shook up that he called his sister at work and told her what had happened. She said, "What are you going to do about it?" He said, "Well, I'm going to see if I can't take care of my business and get it all in order in 1 week. I've got 7 days." And she had tears coming down her eyes when she was telling me this, coming down her face. She said, "I was so happy that I kept him praying for him for 45 years that I was crying." You know, sometimes I don't think we as Seventh-day Adventists appreciate what God has given to us. You know, when I was in Washington, D.C., taking my doctorate, the Library of Congress, which is the best library in our land, I guess, received from the E.G. White estate A Desire of Ages. And the top librarian looked at it to see what it was all about. And he discovered that it was a book on the life of Christ. So she read a couple of chapters, and somehow it got to her because she didn't put it down. She kept reading, and she kept reading, and kept reading until she finished the book. Then she sat down and wrote a letter back to the E.G. White estate. And she said, I have just finished the book, Desire of Ages. And it is the best book on the life of Christ that I have ever read. The best I have ever read. I have a quotation from the Desire of Ages. As I said, we don't appreciate what God has done. Ellen White says God would empty all heaven to bless the Adventist church. Really, I mean, we really don't know what we have. This is page 141. And I hope you take it seriously. It says here, there are many who need the ministration of loving Christian hearts. There are many who need the ministration of loving Christian hearts. Many have gone down to ruin. I underline the word ruin. I could never believe that God would cause a person to be lost because of anything that I did or didn't do. But evidently, according to Ellen White, that happened. She says, many have gone down to ruin who might have been saved. You know, that's a serious thing. When you talk about, eye hath not seen, nor ear heard, neither has entered into the hearts of man the things that God has prepared for those who love him. To realize that because I didn't go out and witness to my neighbor, they're lost. They're gone to ruin. When Mrs. White says, who might have been saved. Friend, do you realize that I pastored the Racine, Wisconsin, north of Chicago, south of Milwaukee, at Racine, Wisconsin, their church. And we had a Bible chain class, and we knocked on all the doors of the people around my church. And the third door down from our church, a lady took the Bible chain lessons and became a Seventh-day Adventist, and she was so thankful that she had attended the church for all these years. She would live by the church, but now she was a part of it. How close can they be? And you still don't know they're there. Well, it says here, many have gone down to ruin, who might have been saved. I understand the word might. Who might have been saved if their neighbors, common men and women, had put forth personal effort for them. Well, I felt bad when I read that about my Racine church, and a neighbor 3 doors down decided to come and join our church. We'd never given her the opportunity before, and there's a lot of other pastors because that church was there for 50 years. And the person who lived 3rd door down was never invited to come be a part of our member. There's one thing one phrase that's repeated twice in this statement from Desire of Ages. It says, because common men and women have put forth personal effort for them. Many are waiting to be personally addressed. They're just waiting for someone to come and say, come. You know, I was shocked when I read in the Adventist World Radio where we have 500,000, a half of a million people being taught Jesus Christ so they can be baptized. It's amazing what God is doing when he has someone to help him. Now, this is one statement that is mentioned twice in this paragraph. I remember, and I've still got mine, our pastor on January 13 passed out evangelism through prayer card where you can put down 5 people on a prayer list. One of my people are dead now, but the other 6 that I put down are still living. And I'm praying for them consistently because some of them I know. But I want to read this to you because this made me feel so bad. It says, in the very family, the neighborhood, the town where we live, there is work for us to do as a missionary. What about your family? Are they all in the church? Or are they like Josephine Cunnington Edwards' brother, out of the church for 45 years before he finally woke up and the angel put him back in again? You know, God wants everyone to be saved. The Bible says he's not willing that any should perish. And he puts churches in given areas so that we can reach out to people near the church. It says here, in your city, in your neighborhood, in your home. Your home. What about the neutrals who are looking for answers? I remember my wife passed away about 8 years ago. And we have one child that is not very regular going to church. He's on the books, but not very heavy. And she said and wrapped up our great controversy and mailed it to him. She said, I'm going to not see it, but I'm hoping that he will come in. In the very family. Friend, what about your family? Do you have members of your family that you need to be putting on the prayer list and praying for? And if they don't come the first year, the second year, the third year, are you still praying for them in 40 years like Josephine Cunnington did? It says, what about the neutrals who are looking for answers? Waiting to be convinced. Are they being forced into decisions while we remain speechless? When only a kindly word could make them into a friend. You know, twice, Ellen White says in Desire of Ages 141, in the very family. I can't help but feel that every place I've pastored, there are children that are not in the church. They're not there. She says, in the very family, the neighborhood, the town where you live, there is work for us to do as missionaries for God. If you haven't used this card that the pastor gave us January 13, and there's lines there that are still vacant. Mine isn't. They're all full. And I've been praying for these people. And the husband of the non-wife came back to me and she said, I don't know what happened, but something's happened because my wife is different now. But she passed away. She was on my prayer list. I hope you have a prayer list. And that for the neutral people of your family, in your neighborhood or in your home, you're working for them too. Listen, if Josephine Cunnington Edwards can work 45 years for a brother. What do you think the brother is going to say to her when they get to heaven and he's there? Because she had praying for him. He's going to be so thankful that she had a sister that prayed for him. Today, the Lord is still available. The doors of heaven are still open. And God is still looking for honest people, multitudes in the valley of decision. And He's looking for people. As the bulletin said, there's a need for people. And the bulletin says that we would pray for you right now, all nations. Let's remember, we have people looking for Christ. And we have the Christ they're looking for. And even if they're in our own home, they're still important to us, to the rest of the family. They're all there. We're waiting for them to come.